Welcome back to the MedTech World Podcast. Today we have with us Dr. James Somauroo, CEO and co-founder of SomX. SomX is a full services communications agency for health tech and biotech companies. And with that in mind, let's dive deep into the interview. James, Dr. James, I'm so happy to have you with us today. I've really been waiting for this specific podcast for quite a while now, because first we had to know, I know that you're a busy guy, so it's really, really great to have you here with us. And also from podcaster to podcaster, that there's that special link that I can definitely, I don't even have to think, and that's going to be a really, really lovely conversation here. I'm really looking forward to it. So, James, let's get down to it really and truly, because, it's all about questions and it's all about conversation. And I really appreciate the attention that you put into creating an engaging conversation. I really love that. And I've listened to some of your podcasts. And recently I was really struck by one which was discussing specifically reimbursement. In fact, then we followed up on a LinkedIn comment section. We were talking about the pay it forward concept. So I'd really love one day to even continue that discussion. But I really want to go to the root of your story. What's your digital hair journey? Like, how did you end up doing podcasts as a living? How did you end up, doing all of this communication work, especially when it comes to health tech and biotech, which, okay, it's growing exponentially, but, 3 to 4 years ago, sometimes, people were a bit hesitant about getting started or even doing the jump in the first place. So what's your journey? Tell us all about it.
Well, thanks, mate. Thank you for the very kind introduction. So my journey, I'm an anaesthetics IT doctor by background. I practiced clinically for 5 years. I was a bit of a fish out of water in medicine, to be honest. Like I had a lot of other interests. I didn't enjoy the clinical work as much as all my colleagues around me were enjoying it. And so it became apparent to me that my life would be better outside of medicine as a career. Now, it wasn't as simple and as straightforward as that, as any clinician will tell you that's looking to go and do something different. Trying to actually plot your way out is not an easy feat. But I always had other interests, and I think while I was a clinician, I was pretty heavily involved in what's called quality improvement. So you do quality improvement projects, which is basically, for those that aren't doctors and for those that aren't doctors in the UK, quality improvement is basically fixing the system rather than fixing a patient. So you find a problem to solve in the hospital and you go and solve it. And you write it up into a project. And I started to do those, and I started to really enjoy those things. The first thing I did was, and it sounds silly, but I fixed a printer. Now,
well done. We fix printers every day here.
It sounds relatively innocuous, right? It sounds like a small deal fixing a printer, but if you only got one printer that works on the whole floor, and everybody needs to print their patient lists in the morning to start their ward rounds, ward rounds start late. And if ward rounds start late, they finish late, and patients get fed late, and then blood glucose drops, and all these these things that happen that knock-on consequences for something that doesn't seem that much of a big deal. But all of a sudden, when ward rounds start on time, everyone's a bit happier. Ward rounds finish on time. You don't have to get in as early. Therefore, there's all these little things that happen. So I started to do these little projects like that, and I started to see the impact, and it made a difference. And so I then did other things like we had this computer system for writing discharge summaries. So when a patient is discharged from the hospital, you have to write a summary of why they were there. So you need their notes and you write this thing. And we had this complicated way of doing it, and we simplified it. And we got a load of people around the table to say, what do we actually need? Who is this for? Well, it's for GPs. What do they need? Well, they need this. So we had to just simplified it. And then all of a sudden, like, discharge summaries were way easier to do. They got done quicker, like the time dropped and all that kind of thing. So I started to see the genuine impact of these small changes in digital health and technology that would allow for actual impact. And that became a bit addictive, to be honest. And so I ended up, to cut a long story short, I ended up shadowing people in finance to understand the money and how the money moved. I ended up shadowing the chief executive of the hospital to understand the wider kind of business side of the hospital and to understand more about the incentives of how they do things and why they do things. And that allowed me to write business cases. And so I wrote this business case for leasing a new blood culture analyzer to put on the neonates ward to get babies home quicker. And that kind of put me on the map, really. The clinical director at the time said it was really good. They weren't going to do it because they couldn't, if they discharge people any quicker, they've already got a half-empty unit, which is brand new, and they get money based on the people that come in. So there's all these strange incentives, which is a great learning point, you know, understanding budget boundaries and things. All this stuff is incredibly relevant to health tech and digital health. But learned a lot as a clinician doing that stuff. So when I'd made the decision that I actually wanted to do something else that wasn't clinical medicine, but wanted to be very much remained in the impact, I did fellowships. And so I did a fellowship at Health Education England and NHS England and learned the policy side of things as well. And because I knew policy, because I knew management, because I knew clinical, because I knew tech, I then moved to an accelerator. So I moved to the Digital Health London Accelerator, started off helping 10 startups, ended up running the program with Hannah to help 30 startups per year. And so got to know a load of the startups in the UK health tech ecosystem, started my own accelerator after that. And then basically started SomX after that, realizing that when you're running an accelerator, we were helping them with largely communication stuff. Accelerators take equity, but agencies take cash. And so if we do one thing, which is communications, and we do lots of things, but if you do communications, you can charge startups to have money for it, and then you've got a proper business. So that's what we run now, and that's roughly the story.
Wow. Definitely, I'll be remembering printer-induced hypoglycemia. That would definitely be my list. Maybe I should code it even, because now I'm into coding terminology and health data standards. So I'll make sure that possibly maybe we can propose that one after a malfunctioning printer of the world. So that's definitely, and the quick treatment would be the abolishment of printers in general. I mean, I'm all in for that.
There's plenty of startups trying to do that.
Oh yeah, I know that, and but that would definitely take longer. But one thing which really struck me there is how you this idea that what really started this journey is that possibly you weren't 100% happy, doing just the clinical work, and then you jumped into quality improvement, and it's amazing how you've evolved from quality improvement to digital health. That's really fantastic, and even like this ideas of fellowships in Malta, we have to kind of even invest even further into the idea of fellowships. Even people, like doctors coming to do fellowships in Malta. That's something which I think as a Maltese clinical and public health, let's say, community, we definitely should consider this idea of fellowships, doing like a very deep experience, at least 1 year or 6 months minimum, to kind of evolve this. And I'm very excited to see how that would turn out, especially in digital health. But you already started kind of going into this. And first of all, I will ask you, how did you come up with the name SomX? That's like question number one. But what I'm really intrigued about, because you mentioned that you're working with a couple of startups. First you mentioned 10, then 30, and then you've evolved. You had the accelerator, the agency, having a very sustainable business model at the end of the day, because that's what keeps us going. And my big question to you is how did you make it work with the organizations? What are your what is your value proposition, and how do you make it work for them? That's I would really love to hear that one. Go for it.
So on the first question, SomX, obviously my second name is Somauroo, and
okay.
it was a holding name, to be perfectly honest. It was a holding name that stuck because it just made sense. It was unique. It had an X in it, so obviously it's really cool.
Yeah.
So like,
I won't do that because mine would be like butt X. So definitely not going that direction. That would be hilarious.
it would be, and it would still be really cool because it's got an X in it, of course.
Thanks, man.
But yeah, man. So like a business model and making it sustainable. So where I got to with it. So I've interviewed so many entrepreneurs on my podcast, and like so many of them say the same thing, that there's never a light bulb moment. It's incredibly rare anyway, incredibly rare that at some point you just get this light bulb moment of, and there's the idea, boom, it's just going to come to you. Of course not. I've been in the space speaking to startups since like 2011, like, speaking to startups and digital health companies and tech companies and trying to do different things, first as a doctor, then as a this, then as a that. And so I've seen the whole space from various different vantage positions. So I feel like I had that understanding of how different people saw the world. So that's the first thing to say, which is that I understand how doctors think because I was one. I understand how the finance department think because I shadowed them and I did projects with them, and I get it from a hospital finance point of view. I understand the tech companies because I spent time with them and I know what they want. And so I ended up knowing how to speak clinical, management, tech, finance. And so I can speak all these different languages. And so the ability to do that allows you to be a translator between all those different people. If all those different people are around the table trying to do a deal, I can say, no, what they mean is this. Or like, actually, they've said that, but that means they can save 5 bed days. And speak in these different currencies that different people understand, right? And so you become this translator between all those different worlds. And so when I was running accelerators, that was my value, is that I understood those different things. Now, what that is communications, ultimately. So whilst that was my value on accelerators, the main value I was delivering was in communications with those accelerators. And so actually what this then becomes, and network, of course, because you're relying on the organizations that have set those accelerators up in their networks. But that's really what it became. And so many of the startups that I was supporting in accelerators were saying the same things, which is we can't find people to do marketing because nobody understands the space as well as we do that also knows how to do marketing. And the agencies are all cross-sector. There's no health tech specific agencies that understand the same things that we do, right? So that's where it started, which is I had a good LinkedIn presence. I was running the podcast. I know content. So I know marketing. I know personal brand. I know branding. I like design. I'm good at design. And so I had many of the components, but what I didn't have was press and PR, which is the missing factor, really. Because if you're going to be niched within health tech, you need to be broad beyond that. Otherwise, you're going to really struggle with market size. So I didn't have press and PR, but who did was Jessica, who is my partner in love and life and crime, my fiance, and now my partner in business. So she was working at a global PR agency. Her clients were big pharma, big medical device companies. And so we put our heads together and just said there has to be an offering. Now, she was already helping some of the startups on the accelerators with bits of press releases here or there, just helping out for free, just giving her time for free. And so it became very clear what the answer was, which was we can set up a communications group that serves health tech companies with exactly what they need across everything in communications. And that's what it is. That's what it was, really. And, as an accelerator, you take equity. But as an agency, you take cash. And you only have to do one thing. And so, or you can be very specific in that one thing that you do, or as I say, broad beyond that. But we do communications. We do it for health tech companies. And we have a view. So whereas before, the classic value proposition for us, to your question about value propositions, the classic value proposition for us, for clients that come to us, is if they've had an agency before, they'll come to us and they'll say the same things, which is, and we now say it to them before they say it to us, which is that I bet you spent 6 months teaching your agency about health tech and then 6 months watching them under deliver. And I bet you had to rewrite your press releases. I bet you had to rewrite your content. And it's, unanimous yes, 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 yes. And I don't blame those agencies, by the way, because they are cross-sector. They don't have that healthcare, health tech expertise. They haven't spent time in policy, hospital finance, health tech startup worlds. They haven't got that experience. So they're doing the best job that they can. But of course, it's so nuanced that those health tech companies require the knowledge of that nuance. That's where we enter the market, right? So initially we had 1, then 2, then 3, then 4 clients. And then here we are with 15 and 11 staff on PAYE and contractors and all the rest of it. So yeah, it's growing quick, man. Over the last 2 years, we've grown. Yeah, we've grown from 0 employees to 11 in 2 years. Well, almost in 1 year, to be honest. But yeah, great journey.
Wow, I mean, it's definitely. I can see that. I mean, even like, for example, even just having an understanding. For example, I know this is communications, but even just having an understanding of, procurement.
Yeah.
So let's say you're trying to communicate your value, but sometimes it might be useless just putting a social media ad because your audience isn't really right there. Your audience would be going to a conference where there are the specific specialists, and those specific specialists, they will advocate for your solution. And because you've been there and they know about your solution and they know the specifications of your product, then they can shape a procurement document based on, so it's all about, being at the right place and at the right time sometimes. So that's really incredible. And I even love the word that you use, nuance. And this word, nuance, is because healthcare is so specific and so special, that you really need to shape your communication strategy. And you actually remind me back to the days where I was writing blog posts for a healthcare startup. And it was, something that I was doing there, and I really learned a lot there, because I kind of even started to understand like where the people will be, the people who actually want to implement, and the healthcare. It's really and truly a lot of it is all about relationship building, and you've mentioned it this multiple times. Even this idea of translator, I really loved how you use this, and recently, even I've been involved in a couple of meetings, and without realizing, the role of the doctor really and truly is to kind of this bridge. Sometimes people mean well, but they communicate wrongly. And because of that, we simply don't understand each other. So the role of the translators, such as us doctors who are like involved in health tech, is really critical, really, really, really critical moving forward. But before I move to the next question, James, it would be really great if you can share with us one particular story that you have, like one particular organization that you've worked with. We'd love to hear that if possible. If not, then you can tell us maybe like how that experience enriched the work that you're doing.
So just to pick up on a couple of things you just said before I crack into that, but I think you mentioned knowing audiences and relationships. It's funny. Those are two of, if not the two biggest and most important pieces of the puzzle to what we do. And one is knowledge based and one is basically activity based. But it's knowing the audiences across the space that gives us our advantage, because you're absolutely right. When we do a communications plan for a new client, we define exactly who all their audiences are, everyone that they care about, but incredibly granular within health tech. So we don't just say primary care. We don't just say GP practices. GP practices is not an audience, but GP partners, salaried GPs, practice managers, community pharmacists, they're all completely different audiences. So we map out all these different audiences and the specific value proposition that our client has to each before we then say what messages are now most relevant and where do they absorb information, because we also know that. Because if you're selling to pharma, you need to be on LinkedIn. If you're really keen on clinicians, particularly in the UK, they're going to live on Twitter. And all these different places that they listen to content and what podcasts they listen to, which trade publications do they read, which nationals do they read, which magazines, which journals. It matters, because then to map their business goals to exactly where they're finding their info, that's where we put the content. That's where we aim to put the content. So it makes complete sense to do it that way around. So knowing the audiences is what gives us our, I would say, a huge competitive advantage, to be perfectly honest. And that's what gives us our health tech specificity. And the other bit that you mentioned is relationships. Now, this is key. This is key for most business, but for us, when we're talking about press and PR, like one of our goals is to, we need to get people press coverage. Now, the way that you do that is send out press releases and hope for the best, or you build relationships. Now, we have the Health Tech Pigeon podcast as well as part of what we do. 𝐂𝐨𝐦𝐞𝐝 from Sifted, he writes incredible health tech articles for Sifted. He was on our Pigeon podcast this morning. So we're building relationships with these journalists, because if you want 𝐂𝐨 to write about you, well, there's two ways you can do that. You can send him a press release and hope for the best, or you can build a relationship with him, know exactly what press releases he wants because you know exactly what he needs to hear. Don't then send him 99% of the press releases you were going to send to him, and only send him one every 12 months that you know is going to be in his ballpark and he's probably therefore going to write about it. That is the skill to PR. Now, I've learned this massively from Jessica. I've not been from a PR background myself, but that is how you build a business. That is how you build a business credibly in this space. So really, I'm just glad you brought those up, because I think, astutely, those are incredibly important. Now, in terms of like things that we've done, we get asked this all the time, and actually I can definitely point to certain examples. Like Ori Biotech are ones that we absolutely love. Like they're a biotech company, like they're in cell and gene therapy manufacturing. So to cut a long story short, they'll take white blood cells and T cells out your body. They'll weaponize them against cancer. They'll put them back into your body, and then they'll defeat leukemia, and they'll cure you of leukemia with these cell therapies and these gene therapies. And Ori Biotech have a product that is part of the manufacturing component of those cell and gene therapies. Now, what we have done is essentially built their brand so everyone knows who they are. And in doing so, because they are now an organization that people look to online as the center of the information around cell and gene therapy, they've got 10,000 followers on LinkedIn, because everyone sees them as the center of that information. And the way that we've built their content pillars is around patient stories and around industry news and around all the information that their key audiences in pharma and everything will learn something from. And so a huge factor around their growth online and their brand now, in terms of what people feel when they see the Ori Biotech logo and see the word mark and things like that, is all around adding value. So putting out content is not just selling your product. And I think that's the thing of any content you create, this podcast even, you're not trying to sell me anything. You're not trying to sell your audience anything. You're creating content out in the world that probably people that matter to you will like, and therefore they'll like you and they'll trust you because they hear your opinion, all that kind of thing. So with 80% of all the content that we put out, we're purely selflessly adding value to that community. Now, obviously, there's selfishness in that, because you want them to follow you. Because with 20% of our content, we are going to try and sell, but we're going to try and sell credibly. We're going to try and sell through case studies. We're going to try and sell through genuine, real testimonial and product descriptors and good animations that show exactly what that product does, and all these things that aren't just please buy my product because it's the best. Because it's that video, isn't it, that Steve Jobs says marketing is about values. And I think that's what we did for Ori really well, is that you show the values of what you're about, and you create an emotional connection between the consumer and the brand. And so they feel something when they see the logo, because they know what it's about. There's consistency to the brand voice and what they're putting out. I think that's incredibly important. And that's what we do well with clients when they first come in, is that we define all of that incredibly well, so that we are singing down the right hymn sheet for each client, and they are starting to build brand in the right way based on their tone of voice and what they want to achieve. So yeah, it's been incredible, that, and being connected, it's two-way as well when you work with a company like Ori Biotech that's in cell and gene therapy, because like frankly, like the warmth that you feel when you see that company part of life-saving leukemia treatment for children. I mean, you'd have to be pretty stone cold hearted to like not feel something when you're part of that. So there's a two-way street there of us learning and growing and being appreciative for our clients, because we end up involved in the sectors that they're involved in. Like we ended up just doing like almost like a pro bono, like PR project that ended up getting loads of national coverage just because it was the right thing to do, because they partnered with the charity. And as I say, it was just the right thing to do. But like it's great that we get to do that, you know. And I think having a company yourself that you have, you know, between the co-founders 100% equity of, that you can kind of do weird stuff if you fancy it because it feels right. It's kind of nice, you know, and it's a privilege not afforded to many, particularly in health tech, because of the amount of capital required and investment often from institutionals that you need. But yeah, we're taking full advantage of being able to kind of execute our vision in the space, which is, you know, our mission, our documented mission is to elevate health tech and biotech. And we mean that by elevating both the companies in those spaces doing amazing things, like 𝐿𝐸 and all the rest of the clients we've got, but also we do things for those sectors themselves. We do all our events, we do our podcast, we do our newsletter, we do all these things, which of course gets us top of the funnel lead gen stuff. Of course it does, but proportionally to the amount of effort, probably not. But there's so much satisfaction in putting the effort in to do that stuff, as you know, doing this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, wow, I have a lot to absorb there. And,
sorry, I do go on a bit.
I've got, no, don't. I love it. I honestly do. And usually, you know, sometimes we say, all right, let's try to stick to a certain, but I think that today we might do an exception for it, because there's so many golden nuggets coming out here that definitely I hope maybe that this kind of conversation will be fodder for a healthcare marketing course. I'm actually designing one right now. I'm actually designing and delivering one right now. So maybe this kind of conversation can end up in the curriculum there. Something to think about there. And you've really went on this point of, you know, of relationship building, like how like all these different pieces of the puzzle come together to create something which is so valuable and so unique. But I'd like to like press ahead, and there's now like this chance for you to do some blue sky thinking. And I want to ask you, what does the future look like for digital health and medtech, and even more specific to you, actually, health tech? Because I've been listening to this word health tech, and especially from you. And since you show up on my feed a couple of times, I start wondering, digital health, medtech, health tech, like the next evolution in all this terminology. So, like, how do you see the next, 2, 5, 10 years? How do you see all of it evolving, and coming together into something which really will bring the transformation of healthcare and public health?
It's a great question. It's a big question, and it's a question that I in all honesty, it's a question that I struggle with quite a lot, because the answer is I don't know. Now, there are certain things happening right now that I think will lead to a lot of change in healthcare and health tech. Well, let's say healthcare, because health tech really is there to serve healthcare, because ultimately the goal of health tech is to make healthcare better. So I do see AI making healthcare better in a number of different ways. There are so many companies doing so many things in AI that can automate and help on the ground floor. And my hope, let's just say, is that we can start to become a bit more clinician-centric when it comes to thinking about the improvements that we want to make in the healthcare sphere. Now, let me explain that, because I can get cancelled pretty quickly for saying that, for saying anything but things should be patient-centric. Now, I think things should be patient-centric. However, we are at a point at the moment where, and I've been on 3 phone calls today talking about this already, about people leaving medicine and leaving clinical areas as nurses and OTs and physio and everything, and people just wanting to leave as clinicians. I think it's serious. I really do. Like, I think this is a really serious thing at this point, where if the working conditions don't get better for clinicians and quickly, I think the conditions for patients are going to get incredibly worse, incredibly quickly. And it's a worry that I have. Now, there may be contingencies planned. There may be things that people have up their sleeve from a government perspective. I don't know. But my hope is that all of this processing power with AI and the things that it can do in radiology and pathology and speech to text for note taking and summarization and all of this type of stuff that could genuinely relieve the burden for clinicians, I think is so important. And I think it's so doable as well. Like, I genuinely do. I think the adoption of AI, it's reaching more of a mature place, I think, on the hype curve. You know, you have the spike and then the trough of disillusionment and then the slope of enlightenment and all that sort of stuff. I feel like exactly. I feel like we're at that we're approaching a plateau now where it's thought about sensibly. So my hope is that AI can be transformational when it comes to workforce. Now, there's probably many a jobbing clinician that listens to that and goes, "Are you joking? We still have fax machines, etc., etc." As I say, it's not because it's a prediction, it's because it's a hope. I tend to stay away from predictions. They're going to be very rarely right. But I'd say of everything that we can talk about, AI is probably the most boring when you've got other things that you could talk about. But I do think with its applications, if it can make a significant dent in workforce, that's going to be the thing that really unlocks, I think, if you're really treating clinicians properly.
Wow, in fact, you kind of reminded me. Even in Malta, for example, recently we launched a health workforce strategy, James. So
Yeah.
there is like evolution even on a European level. There's lots of policy work on health workforce because this is a clear problem which is showing up. I mean, we can't expect healthcare to happen without, the healthcare professionals. It simply won't work, So really and truly, we just need to see an evolution happening there. That's for sure. But believe it or not, we're coming to the end of the podcast. And I have one little surprise for you, James. I'm going to give you 1 minute, James, to raise awareness on any specific topic of your choice. It doesn't have to be healthcare. It can be anything, but something which is really relevant and really close to your heart and something which, possibly you're passionate about. And I'd love to listen to, that story, that thing that you really need to bring to the world out there.
I'm glad that it doesn't have to be health tech specific, actually, because I think one of the things that I have learnt massively in doing my podcast over 300 episodes is that the people that end up in entrepreneurship and the people that end up doing starting a company or being in a field that is right for them, in inverted commas. And by the way, that's not me saying that entrepreneurship is the pinnacle or the goal at all, but there's a certain level of happiness that I think is achieved by those that truly know themselves. And I think so many of us find ourselves on a path that isn't right so often. And on my podcast, I talk a lot about careers. And with every entrepreneur or leader that comes onto my podcast, we always talk about careers. And I think where people have done the work to understand what they like and what they don't like, because it is work, it doesn't just happen, making bold moves in their career and in life to learn about themselves and learn about what makes them tick, what they like, what they don't like, following both what they have a passion for, but also like what they do in their free time, and trying to find a way to link everything about them and putting themselves on a path to doing what's right for them in their work, I have just seen leads to so much happiness. Now, I think I was put on a path that wasn't right. I found myself on a path that wasn't right, and it was so hard to get off it. I was lucky, I would say, that in parallel to falling out of love with medicine, I was doing things that gave me optionality. I actually think that was pure luck. I think I would have had to have worked incredibly hard, and I may never have actually done that, actually, because of how hard it might have been to discover interest and have transferable skills, knowledge that was useful to a different sector, and to piece together eventually and fumble my way through this fellowshipy era and landing in an accelerator when all of a sudden it was like, oh, my skill set's useful here. I mean, luck, right? But I think knowing yourself and knowing what you're good at. Do you like working in small teams or large teams? Do you like working on your own or with a couple of people or with loads? Do you like really focused tasks, or do you like more open, creative stuff? There's so much to figure out. And I think for people starting out in their careers, it's incredibly tough. I think for people that have been in careers a long time, it's also, by the way, incredibly tough. But one thing that I can report back on, I would say, is that the people with the highest levels of self-awareness, that know themselves truly, and then sort of unapologetically make a bold decision, like there's a lot of happiness on the other side of that suffering. And whether, I don't know what my message is here really, whether it's do the work to know yourself or listen to yourself. But also to be bold in knowing what you want and going for it. I think there's always a problem with those types of messages, in that you're assuming so much about the ability to do all those things based on whatever privileges you have. But to make the most of the privileges if you do have them, but also someone mentioned the phrase the other day that they had the benefit of adversity early on in their life, and that built them into someone that could then tackle different challenges and all that kind of thing. And I thought that was a wonderful phrase, a really interesting phrase that I'm still grappling with now. The benefit of adversity, and I'm sure many people can relate to that. But yeah, a lot in that garbled message, but that's something that I'm incredibly passionate about. I speak to a lot of medical students about, actually.
I have to admit, I'll just tell our followers that was 1 minute, because because honestly, I have never heard such a genuine message on this show. And if I had to summarize, because I love summaries, by the way, I'm like a big fan of book summaries, and I would summarize your message really and truly on being bold to become self-aware. I would keep that in mind. And I also kind of realize that we have a duty to ourselves and to the world to become self-aware. Because if we don't take that step, then the world won't really have access to the best version of ourselves. So we really have a duty. Now I know that sometimes the environment might not be ideal for multiple reasons, because the way you've been born, like even when we think about social determinants of health. But we really need to take a step to be bold, to be self-aware. I think if I would definitely take that as a takeaway message from this podcast. And with that in mind, I'd like to thank all of our listeners. Make sure that you follow us on the MedTech World socials on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, you name it. And with that in mind, we hope to see you in our next episode. Saha u grazzi.